Rude teen mocks elderly bus driver, later finds out he's a war hero. It was a typical Monday morning when 17-year-old Josh Miller boarded the city bus for his usual ride to school. The bus was crowded, the air filled with chatter and the hum of the engine. But one thing stuck out to Josh, an elderly man behind the wheel driving the bus with careful, deliberate movements. The driver, Mr. Thompson, was in his late 70s, with graying hair and a stoic expression. To Josh, he seemed like just another old man, someone who didn't belong in a fast-paced world that valued youth and speed. Little did Josh know, his actions would soon lead to an encounter that would change his entire perspective on respect, honor, and the importance of not judging others based on appearances. As Josh boarded the bus, he immediately noticed the slow pace at which Mr. Thompson was driving. The bus started a little later than usual, and the driver seemed to be more cautious than most. Frustrated by the delays, Josh muttered under his breath, loud enough for the others on the bus to hear. "This guy's too old to be driving. He can't even keep up with the traffic," Josh said with a laugh that bordered on mocking. The other passengers looked around nervously, unsure whether to react. Mr. Thompson, however, didn't seem to notice. He continued driving as if the words didn't bother him, but Josh didn't let up. He rolled his eyes and kept grumbling, convinced that the elderly bus driver was nothing more than a relic of the past. Little did Josh know, the man he was ridiculing wasn't just any old driver. He was a man who had served his country with incredible bravery, and the story of his life was far more remarkable than Josh could ever imagine. Josh's ride to school was like any other day. He stood by the window, tapping his foot impatiently, watching the world rush by. His friends were chatting nearby, laughing at the latest gossip from school, while Josh couldn't help but feel irritated by the slow pace of the bus. He glanced at the elderly driver, who sat behind the wheel, his eyes focused ahead but his movements steady, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a quiet strength. "Come on, old man, hurry up," Josh muttered to himself, barely aware of the words escaping his lips. The bus was stuck in traffic again, and Josh was already running late for his first class. Josh was used to the fast-paced world around him. He was always in a rush, always thinking about the next thing, and rarely taking the time to notice the people around him. The elderly bus driver was just another face in the crowd, someone who was simply there to do a job, and Josh didn't see any reason to treat him with respect. After all, he was just an old guy behind the wheel, right? Mr. Thompson didn't react to Josh's comments. He just kept driving, calmly maneuvering through the city streets with a quiet focus. He had been doing this for years, driving the same bus route day after day, and he had seen it all. The impatience of young people, the rush of modern life, the way society often overlooked the elderly. But he had learned to let it all roll off his back. His job wasn't to please the passengers, it was to get them from point A to point B safely. As the bus continued on its route, Josh's mocking continued. He leaned against the pole, speaking loudly to his friends. "I can't believe they still let this guy drive. He probably doesn't even know what's going on half the time." The others on the bus shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension in the air. But no one spoke up. They had all seen people like Josh before, young, brash, and quick to judge. And they had seen the older generation, like Mr. Thompson, quietly accepting the disrespect without a word. But Josh didn't care. He was used to getting away with things, to being the center of attention, to making snide remarks without consequence. He didn't realize the power of respect, or the impact of his words, and he certainly didn't realize that the man he was mocking had a history that would shock him. As the bus approached the next stop, Josh's impatience reached its peak. He was now visibly irritated, checking his watch, wishing the bus ride would just end so he could get to school and put the whole morning behind him. But as the bus slowed down again, Josh couldn't hold back any longer. "Man, I swear, this guy's so slow he should retire already," Josh said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can't believe they let people like him still work." One of the passengers, an older woman sitting near the front, turned her head toward Josh, her face filled with disapproval. "That's not a nice thing to say," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You should have more respect for people." But Josh, not even looking at her, shrugged it off. "What does she know?" he muttered under his breath. "She's probably just as old as he is." The bus continued down the road, and Josh thought little of the woman's comment. He still had his own thoughts swirling in his head, dismissing the older generation and their place in the world. He felt entitled to his opinions, and he wasn't about to let anyone change his mind. But as the bus neared his stop, the driver did something that stopped Josh in his tracks. Mr. Thompson, still focused on the road, made an announcement over the loudspeaker. His voice, though calm, carried a certain weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to let you know that today is my last day driving this route. I'm retiring after 50 years of service." Josh raised an eyebrow, barely listening. But as Mr. Thompson continued, something in his words caught Josh's attention. "Before I leave, I want to share a story with you all. During the war, I served as a captain in the Army. I was part of a battalion that fought in some of the toughest battles, and we lost many good men. I was lucky to make it home, but I never forgot the sacrifices we made." Josh's heart sank. He looked at the elderly man in disbelief, realizing that the man he had been mocking for the entire ride was a war hero, someone who had sacrificed more than Josh could ever imagine. The weight of his words hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time, Josh felt the sting of shame. As Mr. Thompson's words hung in the air, the bus fell into an almost reverent silence. Josh's thoughts raced. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The man he had mocked, the man he had thought was just an old, slow driver, was a war hero, a captain, a survivor of battles he could only read about in history books. Josh's mind began to unravel the implications of his actions. He had treated this man with disdain, assuming he was just another elderly person out of touch with the world, when in reality he was a pillar of strength and sacrifice. Josh could feel the shame creeping up his neck as the other passengers glanced at him, all aware of the tension that had been building. The bus stopped at Josh's stop, but for once he didn't move. He sat in his seat, frozen by the realization that he had been so wrong. The older woman from before, who had warned him earlier, looked at him with a knowing glance. She didn't say anything, but the weight of her gaze spoke volumes. As Josh disembarked, he turned to Mr. Thompson, who was now preparing to retire. His heart heavy with regret, Josh walked over to the front of the bus. "I'm sorry," Josh said, his voice sincere and full of remorse. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to disrespect you." Mr. Thompson looked up, his face softening. "It's okay, son. Not everyone knows the full story. But it's important to remember that everyone has their own history, their own battles. Respect is something earned, not given because of age or appearance." Josh nodded, feeling a mixture of guilt and gratitude. He had learned a lesson he would never forget. In the days that followed, Josh couldn't shake the memory of what had happened on the bus. He replayed the conversation over and over in his mind, wondering how he had ever thought it was okay to treat Mr. Thompson so poorly. The older man had lived a life full of experiences Josh could never fully comprehend. Experiences that had shaped him into the calm, steady person he was that day. Josh's behavior changed after that incident. He began to see the elderly not as relics of the past, but as people with wisdom and stories that deserved respect. When he spoke to his classmates about Mr. Thompson, he didn't just tell them about the bus ride or his apology. He shared the story of a war hero, a man who had lived a life of service and sacrifice and who had never asked for recognition. Josh learned that it's easy to mock people when you don't understand their story, but true respect comes from learning to appreciate the value of every person, regardless of their age or station in life. The story of Josh and Mr. Thompson is a powerful reminder of the danger of judging others based on superficial impressions. It's easy to assume that someone is just another old person doing their job when, in reality, they may have a past that is rich with history, sacrifice, and stories waiting to be told. This story teaches us that respect is not something that should be given based on age, status, or appearance. It should be earned through understanding and empathy. Josh learned that true respect comes from recognizing the value of every individual, no matter how different they may seem at first glance. By taking the time to understand someone's journey, we can break down the barriers that divide us and build a more compassionate world. It's a lesson that Josh won't soon forget. Never judge someone based on what you see on the surface, because there's always more beneath it. Stories that deserve to be heard, and people who deserve to be respected. In the end, the most valuable lesson Josh learned wasn't just about respect, it was about humility. And the truth is, we can all stand to learn a little more of that.